Good evening, everybody. So, as I hopped in my two-wheeled, foot-operated vehicle on the way over here tonight, thanks for being a good sport this morning. Seriously. Yeah. She's selling foam bricks 10 for $1 out in the, and one of them is real that you can throw. And they might all be real. Aim for his head. So I was talking to Donnie. This is not related to our study here tonight. And one of the things that we were discussing this year in my biblical theology class with Dr. Peer, and this was a little shocking to me because it didn't make sense, but it does make sense, that it was his opinion that, Dr. Peer's opinion, that he just you don't hear about repentance much anymore. Like it's not explained or taught or anything like that. And I'm like, it didn't register with me, but then, as I was discussing, thinking about it, talking, just brought it up with Donnie, and Donnie's like, yeah, I think maybe you're kind of right. We focus in on hear and believe, and then we jump straight to baptism. And then we don't really explain or really get into what it means to confess Jesus as Lord or the idea of repentance. So, I'm glad we were able to do that this morning, and I appreciate your thoughts and your kindness and how we covered that this morning. So, we are talking about the Christian home and family, and tonight we're going to talk about everyone's favorite subject, resolving family conflict. Wow, everybody looked down on us. Now, this is important because is there such a thing as a family immune from conflict? You said yes? Oh, yeah. I said immune. Oh, yeah. We all know that every family has conflict. Frankly, every relationship does. If I can't think of a relationship of some kind that not at some point might be some kind of conflict, but especially within the family, it's the people that you spend the most time with. The reality is this: there will be conflict in the family, and so the important thing I would say then is that we be prepared to handle it in productive ways. And so, before I forget, because this is kind of the concept that I think is a good approach, and it's not really here in my notes per se, but it's something that I'm going to go ahead and say while it's on my mind. Otherwise, once it's gone, it might be gone. So, when we talk about conflict, an approach that I'm not always successful at implementing myself, but one thing I think is helpful is the idea of, I don't even know how to categorize it, is the approach to conflict itself. And so, rather, what tends to develop is me versus you. That's the way it tends to develop. My side, your side. And typically there is a problem that's at the center of that. There's some sort of specific conflict. And so what has been my perspective, not always implemented, trust me, I fail at this more times than I succeed, is to pull out of that a little bit and say, look, why don't we approach this as me and you versus the problem, rather than me versus you. You understand what I'm saying? Because what tends to happen is it's me versus you, and rather than it being like that, can we just take a moment to recognize that yes, there is a problem, but why don't we attack it together rather than on opposite sides? And so, easier said than done. So going back to our very first lesson, we talked about the family as an institution today. How's it doing? The family as an institution in our society. About gone? Yeah. It's very much struggling. There's all sorts of issues, pathologies that exist within the family. And so it's no doubt, it's no secret that the family as an institution today is indeed struggling. Husbands and wives often suffer strained relationships. Parents and children are frequently at odds with one another. Much misery in life is due to dysfunctional family relationships. Well, I think it's safe to say that much family turmoil can be resolved when we understand the areas and reasons for potential conflict, and when we are willing to take simple but profound actions. So let's take the first one of that. It's when we understand the areas and reasons for potential conflict. So we may liken this to that. Have you ever heard the metaphor that life is kind of like navigating a minefield? Okay, so now I'm not to take this lightly or to make it a joke, especially in light of what we're remembering today and tomorrow with Memorial Day, because many of our soldiers have been wounded by mines in the minefield. So I don't want to be insensitive to that. But I do think it's an apt illustration. And so the most important thing when navigating a minefield is what? Where you step. Where are you going? Where you step, where are you going? Being careful. Okay, let's say if this was the case, if you were actually, I wish I could remember, there was a movie or a TV show or something that illustrating somebody trying to actually navigate a minefield. Boy, it was intense. But let's think about this. What would make it easier? Hey, yeah, right. So if you know where the mines are at, then the idea is that maybe we can avoid them. And so that's kind of the idea here, is that understanding where the potential problems are, being aware of them ahead of time, then having some sort of discussion or dialogue ahead of time, because what tends to happen is when you're in the middle of the conflict, what tends to happen to reason and logic and calmness and all that, those things tend to get I heard out the door, left behind. And so if we understand ahead of time what the potential problems are, to have a bit of a plan about how these things are going to happen, because as we look through this list of potential issues, I think you're going to see, every one of these is a legitimate potential issue, and probably every single one of you in a relationship and a family has dealt with these in some form or fashion. And so it's necessary and it's good to understand the potential reasons for conflict, and to understand those things, then it gives us a little bit. It's not quite as good as knowing exactly where the mines are, but it helps us. So the first one we're going to talk about, the causes of family conflict, and this is true, is money. Money is a huge issue. Most couples have discussions over the bills, in debt and spending and other financial issues. Parents and children argue over allowances or lack thereof, if there is such a thing. So what are your thoughts? Now today I should have prefaced this lesson with, if you have a bit of wisdom, or if you have something that you could offer as good advice, and especially if it's sound biblical advice, a lot of times it might be practical that if we trace back its origin, we would get back to a biblical principle. But feel free to, I want us to have an open discussion about these things, because your wisdom in this area might benefit us others. So, you know what? I've never really thought about that. This could go for any of us that are in any kind of family relationship. But let's talk about, particularly on the subject of money, what wisdom might you offer to those, maybe something that's been good for you in your relationship, in your family? I know y'all have certain. Okay, all right. So what do you mean, like when you say budget? What?
You know how much money is coming in and how much money has to go out.
Okay, all right. So just that word alone is something that's good idea, is having a budget. So can you think of a time maybe when you didn't have a budget? That laugh almost indicates like, budget, what's a budget? But and then maybe what life before and after a budget? What that might look like, or maybe share some of your thoughts or experiences of wisdom on that. Go ahead. Sure. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so in a relationship, be honest about the money between one another so you don't have a... Sure, okay. Okay. Yeah, so have good communication about who's spending what, right? Because that's always fun. Like in these day and age, I open up my app. Well, in these days, it comes quick. See, used to be when the statement came, right? And you're sitting down and you're trying to reconcile the statement with your checkbook, and you're like, hold on a second. Did you spend $80 at Bass Pro? Oh, yeah, I meant to tell you about that. Yeah, so, don't have any, be open in communication with one another about what's being spent. What's great now is, literally you have that information at your fingertips, instantly. And so the common phrase now some of you, this is going to put a knot in your stomach. They will say, would you like a receipt? Now, some of you walking out of a store without a receipt gives you the vapors, right? But literally, before you turn around to walk away from the thing, you could pull up and see if that transaction post is coming out of your account, right? And so for a lot of us younger ones, they would say, do you want a receipt? No, thank you. No, I've already got that information right here. I don't need a receipt. But wisdom would say, I'm certain some of you could relate some good stories about how the fact that you had the receipt in your hand was the make or break for a good situation. So maybe there's some wisdom in that. All right, what else? Can you offer some others? So budget, be open with one another. This is good information. When we say have a budget, is to have a good understanding of what's coming in and exactly how much is going out and to what and to whom. And you could have a good analysis of where you're spending your money. I think a lot of times we just kind of go along. We don't really pay attention. And then if we were really to sit down and do a little pie chart of where our money goes, we would be shocked. We would be shocked. All right, give me some other stuff. Okay, planning. All right, explain. Okay, so if you plan a trip, you have a budget for that trip, and you got to have a way to pay for it, right? Travel, and if you want to travel and do things with your family, it's not cheap. It's never cheap. For the most time, it's not. It just depends on what you're doing, where you're going. But vacations can be a little bit expensive. I think Larry has a shirt that said, or that they got said, "I'm just here to pay for everything." Yeah. So okay. Go ahead. Okay, live beneath your means. Okay, so that is great advice. Everybody understand what that concept is? Live beneath your means? Okay, so what tends to happen? Okay. She said you forget you have your taxes to pay. That sounds like maybe there's a story there. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. Plan on the plan. So I think the phrase might be kind of like a rainy day, but just plan on doing upkeep on your stuff. Okay. There's a lot of good practical advice here. So when these things occur, and when there's not a budget, or when there's not communication, or when there's not a plan involved, and one individual in the family has this expectation and another has this, then that's a situation that's ripe for what? Conflict. And then when something goes wrong, what is it? Okay, now I think probably all of us at some point or another have experienced that moment when you're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? That's not the greatest feeling. Typically what happens when that moment hits, is it pleasant for everybody? It's usually tense. And so if you have, now come back to our initial statement, it's us versus the problem, not me versus you. That changes the dynamic a lot, I believe. So money can be a big thing, and there's a lot of practical advice, and a lot of, and there's a lot of stuff in the Bible about how we ought to handle our money too. Now, what's a primary factor that kind of undergirds all this? Thinking from a biblical perspective. Okay. 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 So. Mm-hmm. And so the underlying principle here is stewardship, right? And so our number one factor in all these considerations should be our thoughts should work like this. And they don't always. I'm speaking for myself. The way that we handle our money ought to equip us to do more for the Lord. Do we think like that? A lot of times, like, we'd say, we've all thought about this. What if it came in a little bit of money, right? Oh, yeah, we sure would like to maybe redo our bathrooms, like you see on the television. One thing I've noticed is this. You talk about living beneath your means. You watch the fixer-upper shows. Ooh, that's a place for covetousness to develop. It's like, man, that is beautiful. I sure would like to have that. Our home ought to look like that. That can happen easy, right? And so that's some great advice. And so stewardship, living with beneath our means, thinking from a perspective of how can I use and I'm just using the term wealth, or what God has blessed us with, to advance the kingdom. Now, so we think about causes of conflict, though, that you guys have brought up some great things. If we have these things established in a good way, then we can maybe minimize the conflict. Because it is going to happen. It's just a matter of, are we sitting on a powder keg or maybe a firecracker? What have we developed for ourselves here is the potential for major problems or smaller ones that we can deal with. All right, causes of family conflict. B on my list here is children. So when we talk about children, when we say causes of family conflict, what could we possibly be talking about here? Some of you are laughing. Okay, how to handle discipline. That's the first thing on here. Is that a big deal? Is it? Now, I'm just talking for myself. I wish Kelly was in here, but she's in serving tonight. This is a hard one for us because sometimes we might have a little different perspective about how we ought to handle a situation as it arises. So when a need for discipline comes up, again, what's the situation normally like? It's usually tense, right? Something has gone wrong, and your knucklehead has done something, right? And what are we going to do about it? And normally when something is going wrong and it's tense, your emotions are running high. It seems like that's the way it tends to go. I mean, a lot of times it could be where something comes to light that maybe, but it does seem like a lot of the times that emotions are running high. And so, depending on your personality and how you like to handle things, and then your spouse's personality and how they like to handle things, if you don't have that figured out ahead of time, you're bound for trouble. Because, and then once, if there's not a united front with the children and there's division on how you're going to handle that moment, what happens with the children themselves? What are some of the results? Okay, so that's one of the things too. Every kid I've ever seen, they're smart. Everyone. And they will play that like a fiddle. And they know too, right? And they know on certain subjects which one to approach. Right? Well, Mom said, well, Dad said, they know how to work it when they know there's not a united front. It's the truth. Now, this can happen too. I've been guilty of this. This has happened in our relationship where one is trying to lay down the law and the other one is undermining. Right? Where you're in the middle of punishing and you're like, no, don't do that. Then then we've kind of lost all of our authority in that moment, haven't we? Because they know there's not a united front. It happens. So what wisdom can we offer on this from your experience? Okay. Well, that's wise, right? Okay. So make sure that as you're deliberating, that is private. Because you may have a difference of opinion on the severity of the punishment or the style, or and especially with young children, I think this is important too. You got to figure out what hurts. No. Yeah. I know that from experience. But you got to know with the individual child what works. What gets them? There'd be some that could handle a spanking all day long and be like, whatever. It's just a second. I'll cry for a minute. I'll be gone. And I'll be right back to it. Then there's others that you could put in time out and they're happy. Thanks, man. I get to just sit here and, and then other times you put them in time out. It's like just the worst thing you've ever done. You have to figure out what works. I don't think every kid's the same. Now, of course, we just have the one, but I've worked with kids and been around a lot, and some things what will work with an individual as far as punishment. What are your thoughts on that? Does it need to be the exact same type of punishment for every child? What are your thoughts, Keith? Yeah, it's different. It's different. And so you have to figure out what works with the individual personality and child and their will and what gets them. But what are some other thoughts on some wisdom here about how to deal with conflict when it arises with discipline? Okay, so it needs to be consistent and fit the offense. Yeah, I think that's good too, because sometimes our emotions can, we're ready to send them to Attica and, they just spilt a cup accidentally, wasn't on purpose. Okay. 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 Warren says be willing to admit you're wrong. Okay, so there will be times when we do make mistakes as parents. You have to be humble enough and willing to admit you're wrong. Okay, I saw a hand over here too. Great point. Okay, so this is in helping them to get along as a group. No, that's great. So these are little things like this. So in dealing with the conflict and some positive things. Keith? Yes, that's extremely important. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, is to make sure that they understand. Now, ultimately, and this is an important thing when it comes to discipline, is to connect it to what? Okay, the issue. Yeah, so they understand what's happening, but ultimately, on an ultimate sense. Okay, the motivation. Okay, so typically punishment means something has gone wrong, right? And so it's something behavioral, or morally, lying, cheating, stealing, being mean, hitting, all that, all the things that kids do, right? Ultimately, it's what, Larry? It's an offense to God, right? And so I think it's always important that we connect the morality of right and wrong ultimately back to God. And that they think of in terms of that if I do this, if I lie to mommy and daddy, that is ultimately against God. Or that if I do this or that. And so that's an important thing too, because we always need to make sure that we're connecting those things. Okay, did I see another hand? Okay, so you needed time to cool off. Yeah, I hear you. Go get a napkin, right? So, some of you know what that's a little inside joke. So anyway, okay, so but is discipline the only thing with children? The only issue that comes up with children? Okay, what do you mean? Okay, so it's tied to discipline, but it's maybe doing the right things as well. So whether it be in their schoolwork or their chores or what they ought to be doing, or what about their character traits and the way that they involve themselves in and around other people? Being respectful? Yes. Yep, so you can positively reinforce those things. And maybe discipline when you've said, look, we've talked about this 14 times, and we've asked you to do this, to be respectful of other people, and you haven't been, and now you're going to face punishment. So there's the negative and the positive of that. So discipline is a huge thing. What about what educational options to choose with children? Is that an issue these days? That's huge, right? How are we going to educate our children? That's a tough one. There may be differences of opinion on that, because I'll tell you this, if you want to choose certain things, it costs money. Right? So one said, look, it's free, right? Why are we paying for that? It's free. Could that be a subject of how to approach things? Could there be difference of opinion on that, or how we ought to approach? So how we pursue education can be very much a cause of conflict, and so there needs to be a united front on that. Now, one thing that I want to course through all these different things as we talk about them is the idea of approaching every single one of these from a biblical worldview. This might be on my tombstone, and everything in the Bible is essential for something. We talked about repentance essential for salvation, We talk about, well, what's in the Bible that's essential, right? Well, we normally think of, well, the essentials for salvation, because that's the ultimate thing, right? But is salvation the only thing? It's not. Biblical worldview addresses every aspect of our lives. Money, children, all the different things that we're going to talk about here. So, and then how we're going to educate. That's a huge thing. And so we need to think of it from a biblical perspective. Is our choice of education and what we're doing in the home and through the church and through whatever avenue of education you choose, are we teaching our children the truth about God and His world? That's a huge thing. Okay, so causes of family conflict, children and money. Another one is intimacy. For spouses, when we talk about the frequency or quality or infidelity as far as intimacy is concerned, are all common sources of disharmony. Those are huge things. Now, here's something that I want to focus on when it relates to our children. Parents struggle in guiding children through the landmines of our sex-crazed culture. What do you think about that statement? Yeah. This is something that we worked hard for years was to protect her innocence. Just let's not even address this till we have to. And so you would hope that the have to would come later on. But the have to came when I think she was 7 or 8. Because there's just no getting around it. We have to, when she starts like what in the world? What's them two guys doing kissing on the TV? Well, that was just a commercial, right? Here's a good investment. If, like we like to watch a lot of the, like I said, the shows, like cooking shows or the fixer-upper shows and things like that. So now this is not an endorsement of everything that's on this, because there's a lot of it that's pure garbage, but there's a lot of stuff that's good too. Like, you guys heard of the Magnolia Network? You know, it's Chip and Joanna Gaines, so there's a lot of good, wholesome stuff there, but it's part of Discovery Plus. Well, there's a lot of good stuff on Discovery Plus, and there's not, but it's worth the extra $2 for no commercials. Because literally, when we're watching a TV show with commercials, especially during that time, I had to have my finger on that button. Like a hawk. Like I'm watching, like, okay, here it is. What's this commercial about? What are they advertising? Potato chips. Why are those guys kissing? You know, fast forward it, you know, or just to look away or cover your eyes or pull the menu up over top of it or stuff like that. I used to constantly do that. And I still do to some extent, especially with stuff, because, I mean, they advertise like horror films and stuff like that. They show just about everything that's in the horror film in the daggone commercial. You know, do you want your 9-year-old seeing that? Your 10-year-old? No, I want to sleep in my own bed with just me and Kelly. So struggling and guiding children through landmines in our sex-crazed culture it's hard these days. All right, so let's think about chores. So when we talk about chores, causes of family conflict, why would I be bringing this up? What are the possible conflicts? Okay, so you're thinking towards children, but think on a grander scale. Are there any things in and around the home that need to get done? What's that? Okay. Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out where he was going with this. I was like, tell me the story. It sounds good. Steve had his head down, so he looked at all right, so he's like, oh boy, here we go. All right. Okay, so there's stuff that has to get done around the house. So just think about keeping a house going. What needs to be done? Beds need to be made. Floors need to be swept. Dishes, somebody needs to cook, right? These are things that all take place throughout the day. So just think from a husband and wife perspective, what does it matter, your understanding of these duties around the house and how you think about them and talk about them one to another? Is this a possible thing that could conflict could arise? Nancy was here. She's in the nursery. Okay. Nancy, if you have the TV on, we need you. Okay. Okay. Sure.
Women had, they did the laundry, they did cleaning of the house,
Okay. We might sum that up as homemaking. So, but was there an understanding or was there an agreement on how these things were to get done? Was there some kind of understanding? Was there division of responsibilities?
Ward and I have talked this over. We've come to the understanding that we have the honey-do list. They're the boss. We do. They're honey. And we get it right. There you go.
we have no problem.
But is this a potential problem? All right.
Teach our kids to do chores,
Okay.
things, and,
Yeah.
it's a responsibility thing.
Okay.
And, it might start out something minor, you take the trash out, or something. Well, I'll give you, for instance, Shalonda wanted to bake something on Friday,
Okay.
and she did. And I told her, you gotta pick this up and clean this up. And she did it all by herself. I mean, I was there helping.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But until everything was cleaned up, she wasn't allowed to leave the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was her baby, she wanted to do this.
Right.
And it would have been easier for me to go and,
Just clean up behind her. Okay.
but it teaches them responsibility.
Okay. So in relationship to the children, build character. Okay. All right. Let me ask you this question. So have you ever had something that is kind of a joint responsibility and then you're just kind of waiting for the other one to do it? I ain't doing that. You're going to do that. I've done this last 14 times. You're going to do it this time. And I don't care if the trash piles to the ceiling on top of that trash can. Unless there's a, he's had enough. All right. Take out the trash. So, or when we talk about chores, if one has certain ideas of what's acceptable for tidiness and cleanliness around the home, and the other's like whatever, right? Can that be a source of conflict? I know some of you right now thinking, if I find one more pair of socks in the living room floor, oh, wait, that's me. Don't take your socks off in the living room and leave them there. Right? From my dad, it was we weren't to leave our shoes by the door. No, put them away. Take them off. Take them to the closet. Right? So if we have different expectations about little things like chores and things we can do, it can be a source of conflict. And so about the distribution of household work and how to do it, there might be differences on, we had this discussion on the hog hunt. Let's talk about this, ladies and gentlemen. How do we do the dishes? If you have a dishwasher. Ba- Basically, wash them all by hand and then put them in the dishwasher to wash them. Now, here's my thought process: was the commercial said that little package there will take off any kind of dirt, grime, grease off those dishes. So let's see if it works. Now, some of you are like, "That's just wrong. You shouldn't do that."
I don't like dirty dishes to sit in the dishwasher for 2 days or 3 days because I can't fill it up with the two of us in that length of time. It takes 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
And
So you wash them and put them in the dishwasher?
when I wash them, I rinse them off with hot water.
And soap? So there might be some discussions about different. What about laundry? Are there different ways about doing the laundry?
Yeah, I do.
You did it once, that was enough? Yeah, he came out with pink socks and T-shirts. Did I hear something? Gray? Okay. Yeah, so there can be differences on how to do stuff, and that can lead to conflict, right? And so it's probably a good idea to talk about these things. It seems silly or seems maybe small, but if you have a good understanding and communication of these things ahead of time, it can be very beneficial. Here's another interesting one. We've talked about money and children and intimacy and chores. What about friends? Can friends be a source of conflict within a family? What are your thoughts on that subject, friends being a source of conflict? And just talk in general terms. What's that? Okay, so they can monopolize your time. Because, I mean, if you choose to invest your time and efforts into friendships, I mean, that could be something. Time, okay. Type of friends. Okay, so what do you mean by type of friends? Let's talk this out. Okay. Is that a biblical principle? Yeah, bad company corrupts good character, right? So it's interesting to think about. There are certain friends that tend to maybe have an influence on a person in a family or a relationship that might lead them to do or act in ways that are unbecoming or wrong or sinful. That can put a lot of stress on a family, right? So who you surround your family with as far as friends, especially with our young people, our children, is extremely important. And I think this is where you got to have, as parents, coming back to your children, you got to have a tight rein on that one. Because friends and the way that they treat one another can have a huge impact on your children. Huge impact. But not just on children, but on adults as well. Who you choose as your friends can determine the relationship and how things go. It is true that not all friends are helpful to relationships. Some are toxic to your family. And so then the decision needs to be, what are we going to do about this? Now, in this day and age, causes of family conflict: money, children, intimacy, chores, friends. What about this? Entertainment. What are some possible issues that could arise around the subject of entertainment? Okay, the games they play. So, depending on what they're allowed to play and what they do, and that could be a source of conflict, because how do young people usually respond to wanting to play certain games? How do they respond to that? Okay, the other kids, is it something they desire to do? To play certain games? How would you measure that desire? It's strong. I mean, it's strong. I mean, It's a strong desire, is when you, as far as this kind of goes. And so, and it could be for good situations or bad. Good games or even bad games. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of good stuff. And it can be a great way for doing things that are good. It's one of those things that we got to monitor, but can be a real source of conflict. I don't. Some of you've probably experienced this if your child has like a Kindle or something along those lines. We've talked about this a million different times, but monitoring what they do and how much time they're on these things and what they're allowed to do on them is having a tight grip on that is so important. I mean, but I know that can I please play this game? Please. Okay, so I'll just give you an example of one and even the innocent stuff, like you think, oh, this looks kind of innocent. But somehow they still find a way to corrupt it. So there's this one Roblox. Am I saying that right? It's kind of like Minecraft, I think, where you build things and exist in them in your little characters. What's the big deal, all right? Well, so she's like showing me these videos where kids are playing Roblox, and I'm like, what? Wait, what's that one wearing? Somehow they designed their little pixelated character to be very erotically dressed. I'm like, we're done with this. And this is a E for everyone game. And so when I said, you can't do this anymore, or watch these videos on this game, how do you think that went over? Oh, come on. No, Daddy, no. Take it off. You're not playing this anymore, or not. She didn't have the game yet, but she was wanting to show me what it was like, and I'm like, no way. So, what about entertainment? What else?
Entertainment's not just a factor for kids; it's a factor for adults.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So let's talk about that.
Well, if you're, let's go back. If you're dating somebody
Okay.
and they're totally eat up with fishing or
Okay.
softball or something,
Okay.
when you marry them, are they going to give that up? No, it's going to be a source of conflict.
Okay. Great point.
It's entertainment can cause friction between married couples.
Okay. Excellent point. So if this is something that they were loved and involved in and that kind of a thing, are they still going to participate in that once the relationship begins? And that kind of stuff. Those are excellent points and things that there better be communication and understandings about, because there is great potential for conflict. No sports, no westerns. Just go to bed. Just give up and go to bed. When Jeopardy's on, we're watching. Don't Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. Go get on out here. Leave me alone. Yeah.
But it's the kind of music we listen
Music,
to, the movies we go to.
movies. Can I just share with you something that I'm really struggling with? What do we do for our vacations? Did you ever think that you'd have to make a moral decision about where you would go on vacation that didn't involve the word Las Vegas? I mean, that's a moral decision. We all know that one right from the beginning, right? Did you ever think you were going to have to make a moral decision about where to go, maybe even in a theme park? And this is something that we are dealing with as a family. I mean, it's been an important part of my life since I was a little kid, probably 10, 11, 12 years old. I had a lot of great memories, that kind of stuff. But now, I'm literally to the point where I'm done. I'm done. I felt like something was off. Something wasn't right. just in general, I don't know, something was missing or something. And when we see what's happening at a corporate level within everything that they're doing and the way that they're trying to weave in there's no other way of saying it other than it's an evil agenda straight from the pits of hell in a company that is supposed to be about just entertainment. Just make something entertaining that all people... There's no agenda in Swiss Family Robinson. You guys ever remember that movie? Remember those movies? Or Puff the Magic Dragon, or things that even up through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, there didn't seem to be any kind of agenda. Now it's an agenda-driven entertainment company. I cannot deal with that. Now here's the problem. They own ABC. They own Star Wars. They own Marvel. They own ESPN, which I'm already done with them anyway. But you can see how these things are coursing through. I mean, so what do we do? It's hard. Anybody else here dealing with that? With you, yourself, and your children? Anybody else seeing that or feeling that? Keith? Okay. Yep. Yeah. I understand. Do you ever think you'd have to make a moral decision about whether to go see a baseball game or not? A moral decision. Guys, we've gone over time here. Yep, that's true. Yep. And that comes back to what we do with our kids and what we get them involved in. Great point. Yeah, because when we decide what we're going to want them to do, we want them to be well-rounded, let them to have their be part of a sports teams or dance or whatever it is. There's so many different things that our kids can get involved in and doing this kind of stuff, and none of them care about the church. I mean, about like that. I shouldn't say none, but you have to look hard to find one of these things that will not trample upon your ability to continue to participate in the body of Christ. Great point. I wish when we talk about how we deal with that with our children. So we've passed up on a lot of opportunities for Shalonda to do stuff because it will conflict with, and it's not just because I'm in ministry. It's something I believe that we would be passionate about even if I wasn't in ministry. All right, we're going to continue this discussion because we've not even got into the solution yet. We've not even really got into the solutions to these things. We're talking about some wisdom here and there, but we're just talking about these potential things. We've got 2 or 3, 4 more to talk about, and then we'll talk about really what is the key to resolving family conflict. All right, thank you all for your thoughts and participation. Thanks for the extra